Hey everybody, I'm Robert Fry and I'm an alcoholic. It's good to be here with you guys tonight. It is. I was cold standing there in a long sleeve shirt. I'll bring that up right away. And I thought, man, if I were sitting out there in short sleeves like some folks are, I'd be frozen to death out there. So anyway, it does feel good. It's better than being hot. When I speak, I tend to sweat anyway, so I'm probably working against my own best interest. But anyway, it was a little chilly in here. But it's great to be here with you guys. My sobriety day is April 2nd, 1997. And my home group is the Willow Springs group, which meets now in downtown Fuquay-Varina, North Carolina. And I apologize for being late. I hadn't been late to a speaker meeting that I was a speaker at in a long time. But Steve said he would say a prayer before the meeting, which, you always appreciate that. But he almost went into a talk during the prayer. He just went on. He wouldn't stop. And we came walking back in, and Daniel had already opened the meeting. So anyway, we were here in fact, I got here about 6:20. But anyway, it is good to be here. I love this group. Like Waylon said, Daniel and I were reminiscing about stuff, and he and I got sober. You got sober in 97, right? Yeah, I got sober April of 97, and we were reminiscing about stuff, which is fun to do when you've been around a while. Waylon said I'm more mature now. Well, I'm 21 years older than I used to be. So, if I hadn't figured out something in 21 years, then there's a problem with that. So I'm a lot older than I used to be, and I'm grateful for that. I can't believe I've been sober that long, and I can't believe I've been coming around AA that long. I can assure you, when I was a newcomer, if there's anybody new out there tonight, when I was confused and I was right out of a treatment center, I went in treatment in November of 1996 and got out in January of 97 and continued to drink off and on. But I was just a mess. The idea that my life would look good or be happy or normal, seeming was just totally far-fetched. I couldn't imagine, like the book says, a life with alcohol or without it. I was at that point where I didn't understand that, and it was ugly. I was afraid of everything. Alcohol wasn't working for me anymore, but I knew I could run back to it and at least numb out and go to sleep at night. I couldn't sleep at night. It used to drive me crazy, but if I keep a little bottle of whiskey in the closet and I'd take a few shots off of that and chase it with a glass of water before bed, and it seemed to do the trick, It's a bad remedy to keep doing over and over again every night because you kind of get hooked on it like that. But it's just the way it was at the end of my drinking for me. And so, I can tell you that 21 years later, life is a lot better. In fact, we were telling stories, and I try not to just reminisce all the time. You get into that sometimes. But I got drugged down here, I suppose the first summer I was sober, which would have been July, August, September of 97, by Steve, because my sponsors, Steve and Tom, worked together professionally and have been in AA, together for a long, long time. And I've known a lot of you at least that long. I came over here and heard Steve speak and a bunch of people speak. And it's just neat to be invited back, to continue to come back years and years and see the same people, over here and to be able to be a part of that. It's pretty awesome. In fact, some of you guys, Steve and Daniel and Wallace, were coming to Wilson. I ended up crash landing out of that treatment center at my parents' house where I grew up in Wilson, North Carolina. And Wallace and some of you guys were some of the first speakers I ever heard. We had a speaker meeting on Saturday night at the principals group there in Wilson. And that's where I first learned to identify. I was sitting out there confused, didn't know whether I was really an alcoholic. I was 19 years old when I got sober. I was 18 when I landed in that treatment center. And I can assure you, at 18 or 19 years of age, the idea of not drinking seemed like a horrible idea to me. I was wide open. I had been wide open with drinking, and I was heavily into drugs too, and I'll focus on our singleness of purpose here and adhere to that and talk about my alcoholism in a general way. But I was wide open by 14 or 15 years old. I started drinking and I loved it. I didn't immediately start getting into trouble from it, but I just loved it. But by the time I was 18 years old, almost 19, I had absolutely drank just about all I could stand. And I landed in a treatment center, and I'm grateful for that. You can be in such delusion. The big book talks about being in self-delusion, particularly in the third step, and in some other areas too. And I was in total delusion about who I was and what I was doing. I was drinking every day. I couldn't go. I was a college dropout. I'd been in college. I fancied myself an intellectual, that I was in college, and that I had the right combination of alcohol and all this stuff to party and to enhance my mind. And none of that was true. It was just a total disaster. And I kept thinking that I would pull myself together at some point, and that it would be different. And of course, it just was absolutely wide open. And so I'm really grateful. I landed in the treatment center, and I think it may have been October or November of 96. And I did get off the drugs I've been using in December of that year. And then my idea was that I would continue to drink, because if I was just drinking, that would be okay too. So if anyone's got that in the back of their mind, I like to share that, because that was something for me. And I've worked with other alcoholics over the years that had that idea too, that if I just drink, or if I just drink this way, or if I just drink, wine or whatever it is, it'll be different. I tried that too. And I can tell you what happened for me was I could stay sober 2 or 3 weeks, then I'd go in and drunk. And the last time I drank, in fact, it was the night before I heard Wallace speak. Again, Daniel and I were talking about, I don't know whether some of this is true or if it was made up in my newcomer mind, because things were weird back then. I mean, I remember things that may not have even happened, but I think I remember them. But I do know this happened, because this much is true, and I think most of the story is true. But I had been, I was still in the mode, again, this total delusion about not really having an alcohol problem, because I was too young to be an alcoholic. So I was dating this girl in Wilson. Again, back crash landed at mom and dad's house on their couch temporarily. And we were going to Greenville for something. Greenville was about 45 minutes east of Wilson or so. And we drank on the way there. I mean, that's just how we did it. We always packed beer or whatever it was. And I had an old truck at that time. And we drank, we drank on our way there. And again, that seemed like a normal evening to me. That didn't seem like a problem. And we drove back, and everything was fine. And then I left her house that night. I suspect it was very late in the night. I don't really remember exactly when, but it was dark. It was summertime. Well, no, this would have been late March, springtime. And as I'm driving on these country roads back into town where Wilson is, I drove the truck off on the right side of the road, hit the ditch, and it spun in the ditch and then spun across the road and then flipped over upside down on the other side of the road in the other ditch, facing the other direction at that point. And, I don't know whether, God takes care of drunks and fools or whatever, but I was both at that time, I can assure you. But I was driving that truck, and it ran off the road, and I remember I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. And I can remember, it was one of those old, it was an F-250, like in 1986. It was when trucks were really bumpy old trucks, and it had a bench seat. It didn't have any kind of bucket seat. It had one seat. And you could sort of scoot one side of it up like this a little bit, but you could slide right across it. And that's what happened. I remember being pulled off the steering wheel as it spun, and I hit the passenger side door. And then it rolled over the road and flipped, and I'm laying there on the ceiling wondering what just happened. And then, of course, my next thought was, am I okay? And I was totally fine. I mean, it was just one of those things. A lot of people end up rolled over on by those cars, or when those rollover accidents happen, particularly when they're not buckled in the car. But I wasn't. And when I realized I was okay, my next thought was, oh my God, I hope nobody saw this, right? Now I'm beginning to formulate a plan to get away from it. Like, we don't want to be found with the, we'll figure this out tomorrow kind of thing, when I haven't been drinking. And as luck or fate would have it, I had turned over right in front of somebody's front yard out there in the country. And of course they heard it, and they had called the rescue squad and the police before I'm sure I ever got out of it. But, I'm waiting there, and I'm drinking everything non-alcoholic I've got, trying to rinse my mouth out and get better and all that stuff. And someone called my parents. This is really before cell phones were very big. I mean, people had cell phones back in '97, but they weren't very good. They were terrible. They were like this. I don't think they were those bag phones anymore, but they just weren't very good. I mean, people didn't have. A lot of times people would give you their home number then. People didn't really have cell phones like that. But someone called my parents. I mean, anyway, I don't know how my parents got there. Again, I don't think any of us had cell phones at that time, but my parents arrived, highway patrolman arrived, the ambulance arrived, and they checked me out, and I think I'm going to get locked up for DWI. And again, I don't know why this happened for me, because there's probably somebody sitting out there. I know there's someone somewhere, it may not be in this meeting, that this happened to, and they went to jail that night, but they let me go home with my parents that night. I didn't deserve to go home with my parents that night. It played into the narrative that I had in my mind that I was special. The rules were for you guys. They were always bent for me, right? I deserved a break for whatever reason. It's just the way I thought, that I was different. And so that played into that narrative a little bit. But again, I don't know whether I'm grateful for that, I suppose. I didn't have a DWI conviction on my record when I got sober later, and that certainly makes life easier. But I didn't deserve that. I can tell you that. And but anyway, that's what happened. But that was the last. That was the last event where I knew that if I didn't really do something serious, I'd end up killing myself or somebody else the next time that happened, and that I wouldn't be able to stay sober on my own. Because I've been trying. By the time I got out of that treatment center in the first of '97, it was really trying not to drink or regulate my drinking in different ways, during that January through April. And it wasn't working, and I knew that. And after that car accident, I really knew that. And so again, best I can recall, to get back around to Wallace, That was a Friday night, and then the Saturday night speaker meeting was the next night, and Wallace was the speaker that night. And I'd been watching a group of guys who sat at one of the front tables. The principal's group of Wilson had like a big rectangular shape in terms of how they set up their tables and their back chairs. And of course, I was always sliding in around the back, trying to hide out a little bit, and there were these guys who would sit at the head table, kind of like this table over here, that table, and I'd be watching them up there, and they were clearly, Paige was there, Chuck Kraft, Steve, a bunch of really my heroes in AA now. I didn't know them then, but they were sitting up there, going to AA every week. And what impressed me was that they were happy and they were sober, and it was clear that they were. They weren't just putting on an act or something like that, but they were, had legitimately had a drinking history like I had, and they found a way out. And not only they found a way out, but they had jobs and families, and they were, were coming together, and they were happy and doing stuff. And I was just miserable. I was still in that mode where I couldn't find a way to drink and not drink. I was sort of at that jumping off place like the book talks about. And but that's what it took for me to really get into AA. So I've been going to meetings, but before that meeting, I said, I'm going to ask one of these guys to sponsor me, because I kept hearing about sponsorship and step work. Sponsorship, it was just one of those things that was sort of bouncing around in my head as a newcomer. And I think they had even recommended that in the treatment center. And I don't know if I knew what the steps were exactly or what they were designed to do. But I had a notion that if I had to try to plug into that, because I've been trying to do it on my own for so long and none of it had worked. And so I asked Steve, I said, Steve, I'd like you to be my sponsor. He said, well, let's talk about it after the meeting. So Wallace spoke, and then we were riding around downtown Wilson in his car that night. And I remember him asking me some questions about what I was willing to do, what I was not willing to do. And I was pretty much wide open. I dropped out of college. I was living in my parents' house as long as I could stay sober. So, I was sneaking around. At this point, I was having to hide bottles and hide that beer and stuff that was happening around, and to stay in their house. And so we rode around, and I said, that I'd be willing to work the steps, but I really didn't have any other ideas. I had tried a lot of stuff. I will go back and delve into my story a little bit, but I tried going to psychiatrists. By the time I was a senior in high school, my drinking was really, really beginning to sort of break out and begin happening every day. And some of that peace and comfort that drinking had given me in the beginning was beginning to go away. And so I was beginning to have moments of rage and anger. I was having trouble in relationships, and some stuff I won't really share from the podium here, but my life was beginning to sort of spiral out of control. But I had done well enough as a student in high school early on that I got into college. And so having tested out psychiatry and lied to them about how much I was drinking and all this stuff, I'd tell them about how I felt, but I wouldn't, if they asked me about drinking, I would lie, and so that's what I did. And so if you took the symptoms I had and you didn't factor in all the alcohol and drug use, it looked like I was crazy, and so I'm sure a psychiatrist has seen that before, but, that's what I was doing. And so there weren't really going to be any legitimate help there, because I wasn't certainly ready for it at that point in my life. But anyway, so I tried that, and then I had the other notion was that I got into college in Boone at Appalachian State, and so I had the notion that moving geographically would be a nice cure, and it really sounded like a good idea. I was convinced that if I moved from Wilson, in the eastern part of the state, and went and lived in the mountains, that I could start things over. My drinking would regulate again. I could have some fun with it. It wouldn't be so out of control, and it wouldn't be so weird and all that. And I can assure you, I hit the ground running. We're talking here about that language of the heart, that when one alcoholic shares, we can identify with that, and recovery happens that way. And that's absolutely true. I have no doubt about that, because it happened for me sitting in meetings like this. But it almost seemed like I could fall in with a crowd of drunks who were actively drinking in the same manner. Just like I got swept right up into a crowd like that. It didn't take any time at all. I hit the campus, and they had all this orientation stuff for us, for freshmen. Because I came from a really small private school. I had a graduating class of 27 people. That gives you a sense of how small the school was. Compared to most public schools, that's just tiny, And so I get thrown in with like 14,000 undergrads at Appalachian, And so it was overwhelming. I think it would have been overwhelming for your normal average student. But you take a guy like me that's drinking all the time and is much more interested in finding a party and somebody to drink with than going through the orientation or figuring out where your classes are. You can imagine that started very badly for me. We were doing orientation stuff, and I hooked up with some guys that were there that I didn't know. And boom, we found the party right away. In fact, we found a guy who had an apartment right across from campus, so it wasn't regulated by like the dorms where we had to live. And man, we went over there and partied all the time. I mean, it was just crazy. And again, I think I mentioned this earlier, and I like to mention this because I think Bill Wilson mentioned this in his story. It seems to be one of those things, alcoholics, we had that delusion that we're better than we are and that we're different, and we're special and all that. And I was still at this point where I felt like I could get the right amount of drunk and be really intellectual and do really well. So for any of the entrance things we had to take as part of freshman, I wanted to get good and loaded so I get my mind right, like boom, I'm going to really show them what's up, And the problem with that is if you missed a lot of the orientation, you don't know where the buildings are. And so I went to that apartment we were talking about and got good and ready, got my mind right over there drinking, and then set out to go find where the exam was and couldn't find it, I mean, when you're really good and drunk and everything began to look the same, but I eventually did find the place. And I remember stumbling in late. I'm sure I reeked of whiskey. And I got a seat and scribbled something out. And I mean, I don't know what it was. I mean, I don't even remember getting the score back. I'm sure I got something, but it wasn't like they moved me to the head of the class or anything because of that performance like I thought they would. But that was the kind of delusion I was in. I mean, I was drinking so much and I was really beginning to be incapacitated even when I wasn't drunk. I was just in bad shape. It was really, really bad. We got in some legal trouble up there. And again, my drinking had really gotten to be daily by the time I was a senior in high school. And by the time I hit college, it was just all the time. It was just, we would drink from the time we got up. Sometimes we would continue drinking over 2, 3, 4, 5 days without any sleep. And when you do that for a while, it gets really ugly, in my opinion. I've stayed up a few times over one night since I've been sober for different things. My wife had a baby, and we were in the hospital for that. And there have been a couple of times when I've stayed up all night. I mean, it's weird the next day. If you don't, to me it is at least, when you don't sleep. But if you're drunk and then you're up the next day, it's really even worse, I think. And then like the third or fourth day are like that much worse without any sleep because your body's, it's got all the chemical fatigue and the physical fatigue, and it's all combining into something really, really ugly. And so, we were in the dorms, and I like to share this because it's always hit home for me in terms of identification. And I was not a guy that had not been taught how to live life. I had done well enough in high school, but drinking was really beginning to take me out of things. And so we were at the point where we'd be holed up in somebody's dorm room drinking all night, and the sun would start to come up, right? And, it's always fine when you run around drunk at night when it's dark. When the sun starts to come up, it doesn't feel nearly as good. You're like, ooh, this is, it's not as fun to be drunk at 6 a.m. as it is like at 12, p.m. at night or whatever. But I would hear people's alarms going off, and so we'd be up all night drunk, and I'd say, man, I'm going to have to get, I'll sleep it off today, and I'll get to class tomorrow, whatever is what I would say. And I would hear these alarms going off and hear people getting up and walking down the hall and turning the showers on and like getting dressed for the day and stuff. And it just seemed like I didn't know how they did that. And that seems like a stupid thing to say. Like, how do you not know how to get up, set an alarm, get up, and take a shower and go to class? Well, I can assure you I was having a lot of trouble with it at that time. I mean, it was not coming together for me. I mean, it was like I didn't understand how they were doing it anymore. I couldn't stay away from drinking long enough to break that cycle, to get back on like a regular sleep cycle or anything. And so I can tell you, that's how my college career began and ended very quickly. In fact, I'm always a little bit jealous. I mean, I don't regret, getting sober by any means, but it's always a little funny how this happened for me. But I didn't even last an entire college semester, which really seems like a difficult thing to do because you can actually bomb out one semester, right? Like you can attend no classes and drink the whole time, and they'll still let you come back for another semester and then try and make your grades up. And then if you don't, I think you have to leave for a while or something. But I mean, I can tell you, I would have loved to have done that, but I mean, I was miserable. I mean, I left there. This was sometime in November, I think, of '96. And I was coming apart. I mean, if I wasn't drunk, I felt like I was losing my mind. I was used to drinking all the time and drinking a lot. And so my parents didn't know what to do with me, and I really didn't know what to do with myself. I still had some notions that I would pull my act together at some point and go back to college. And through a minister of ours at the church I grew up in, he suggested I got sober kind of at the tail end of a lot of treatment centers. At least people have told me that. There were a lot of them that sprang up in the 80s and 90s, and they were beginning to sort of close by the time I came around. But there was one that was open in Raleigh that I got into, and I share this with you because this is the first time I identified with another alcoholic. There was a counselor in there who was a recovered alcoholic in AA, but he was working professionally in the treatment center as a counselor. And I think we make better counselors when we're sober in AA. I won't get into all that, but he was. I mean, I could identify with him, and the reason I say that, he's doing the intake on me, and I'm lying to him, about. They must have some scale, like in those places, about when they say this many drinks, they really mean this, and I imagine every alcoholic lies when they go, right? I can't imagine. I just didn't tell the truth about anything. I certainly wasn't going to all of a sudden tell you how much I was drinking and all that stuff. But anyway, he did the intake on me, and I remember he pushed his stuff aside. And I think he had been sober like 12 or 13 years at that time. And he told me, he said, look, I know what you're going through right now because I was doing it 13 years ago, whatever it was for him. And he said, if I could give you a videotape of my life, it'd look like yours is right now. And if you do what we're suggesting here, you can have the life I've got. And he was clearly a happy guy. I'd seen him sort of working. I'd been, during the intake, I'd seen him around and talked to him and seen him interacting with other people. And he was happy and he was funny and he was laughing and clearly had his act together and clearly was happy about it, And I didn't necessarily know before that moment that he was a sober alcoholic, but he was a sober alcoholic in AA. And so that was the first time where I thought, man, this guy does understand me. It's crazy to think that I'm the only guy that ever drank that way or ever felt that way, but I did. I just felt like here I am, the young, 19-year-old kid. How can I have totally blown up my life like this? How could I be an alcoholic? How could I be in trouble with this already? I just didn't understand that. I didn't know that. But when he told me a little bit of his story, I could identify with it right away. Now, I had to identify with some of my friends who drank a lot, but I never really talked to anybody that was sober from that perspective. So he was the first guy that sort of got through that to me, that, hey, there are people that are on the other side of this. They're not still doing it. I had friends that I'm certain were alcoholics, were certainly drinking alcoholically. And we all had different ideas about how you get feeling better and taper off and stuff like that. But I didn't know anybody who was legitimately recovered and sober at that point except him. And so grateful for that treatment center. Again, it got me going to AA, and I told you a little bit of my story earlier about dabbling around a little bit before I had that car accident and heard Wallace speak that next night. And, as I look back, it really could have gone either way. There were times when I almost drank that first month or two. And I look back now and I don't know how I did. And I even went to some graduation parties, because hell, I was only a year out of high school, I guess, at the time. And so I knew a lot of people that were graduating high school, and there were these big parties. And so I showed up at these parties, and I almost had the notion that I might figure out a way to drink if it seemed right. I was really like only sober a month or so, and I didn't. And I don't know whether that's God's grace or what. I was going to AA. In fact, I think a couple of them, I went to the AA meeting, then I went to the party afterwards. So my intentions were probably really bad, but. And I wouldn't recommend that to anybody, but for some reason it worked out. But I look back now and I can't believe how close some of that stuff was. I'm really, really grateful for some of the friends I had, some of the AA folks that were around me at that time. But I got swept up in the enthusiasm of that. Those early members, I told you about that group of guys that were sitting there at the front of the room. I remember I was always trying to slide in the back, and even though I was miserable and wanted help, I still didn't want you to get too close. It was one of those, I had that isolation. And so they would catch me. I couldn't figure out how they knew that I was a newcomer. There was a group like this. They weren't quite this big. The meetings weren't quite this size, but they were maybe half this size. And if you're new, you don't know. It's a big group of people. Why do they come? So I'm over there trying to get coffee and cookies. And I turn around, there's like four of them with pamphlets in their hands. Hey, man, you got a sponsor yet? Or, hey, here's our meeting list. And I couldn't figure out of all the people, why are they giving them, what about those other people? They look like newcomers over there, It's like they wouldn't leave me alone, and I'm grateful that they didn't leave me alone. Because again, I wanted help, but I didn't want help. I was in that kind of weird little phase, and I'm grateful for that. And I remember getting one of those guys stuck a meeting schedule in my hand, and again, we didn't really have cell phones as much back then, but Paige Wood, who some of you guys know, has probably spoken at this group this year. I can remember they had written their numbers down on a Wilson County AA list or whatever, and I remember he wrote his home number. And I remember he wrote his work number down. And I remember getting home later and looking at that and thinking, I can't believe he wrote his work number on there. Here I am, some, drunk kid at the meeting, and he gives me his work number. It made an impression on me because he was willing to help me that much. He didn't just give me his home number, but he was willing to go the extra length. Now, I didn't call his work number. I don't know what would happen if I had, but he probably would have answered the phone, but he gave me his word. But again, those are those little things that happen sometimes. It seems silly. That I don't know if you can make them happen for people or not, but they happened for me. And it made a big difference for me. And I thought, man, those guys really want to help, is what I thought. here's a guy that's willing to give me his work number, from some random guy who shows up at an AA meeting. And I'm grateful for that because they swept me up in their enthusiasm. And part of, we would drive down here from Wilson. Here's a pretty good drive, and certainly back, 20, 21 years ago, there was a lot less development along some of these roads, and it was really dark getting out here. You arrived here, you felt like you were at the end of civilization or something. But we simply drive forever, But I got to hear my sponsor speak and a bunch of other folks speak here over the years. So it's kind of cool to be back. But they swept me up in that kind of enthusiasm, And that summer, I wasn't doing much. I had a little bit of a job on a plant nursery doing some manual labor, and I would do that. Then we'd go to AA meetings at night. I didn't have a very full social calendar, and I remember them making the suggestion to me that if I could put one half the energy into AA that I did when I was trying to stay drunk, that I'd probably be okay. And that made a lot of sense to me because I can assure you the last year of my drinking, I devoted every ounce of energy I had into getting a drink or getting over a hangover. Or something in between that, very brief periods in between that, maybe getting more money, trying to look normal for a while, going to class, trying to work a little bit. All my energy was devoted to that. My mental energy, physical, everything I had. And so, and they told me that, and I can assure you, I put a lot of energy early on in going to meetings. I went to meetings almost every night for the first several years of my sobriety. In large part because it felt good to be here. I was talking to somebody before the meeting about that. It's always, maybe this is just, I should be grateful that it's almost more of a gift as much as anything, but I've always loved coming to AA meetings. It's never been hard for me to come to meetings. I'm not saying I've always been thrilled about going to meetings. There are times when I probably would have rather done something else. But it's always been really easy because I always leave here a lot better off than when I came here. Even when I'm doing pretty good. Like I was doing pretty good tonight when I got here, But I'll leave here having been here with you guys a lot better off, staying sober one more day together. And so it's always been easy, but I went to a lot of meetings that summer. Again, they drugged me down here, all kinds of stuff. And so I was due to go back to college. Well, I wanted to go back to college, and Appalachia wasn't sure they were going to have me back or not. By the way, I left after before the end of one semester, and so I actually had to go back and meet with some medical staff there and talk to them about getting sober. That I had in fact been sober, and that's what I had done when I fled the campus, in November of '96, that I'd actually gone to get some help. And I guess in a roundabout way, I didn't immediately get the help, but I began the path to get the help. And so that's what happened for me. And they let me back in. In fact, I met with them, told them I was going to AA. In fact, I even staked out some AA meetings in the area before I moved up there. So they let me back in. And so I actually started there just a year after I had started the year before. So I started there in August of '97. And again, looking back, it almost seems like a bad bet. You'd send a newly sober guy to live back in the dorms at a public university's campus. But I was really committed to staying sober. To me, sober, what I'd found at Alcoholics Anonymous was exactly what I was looking for in the bottle. I'd found a way to interact with people, to feel at peace and ease, to feel like I had a place in the world. I'd always felt like either better than or less than. I was never just somebody in a crowd. I always had to be the best or the worst. And never fit in, is what it felt like to me, at least in a fundamental sense. And that's what it always felt like in my mind. I think I fit in okay, it just never felt right to me. But I found that in Alcoholics Anonymous, that ease and comfort, because drinking could make me fit in or make me feel better than other people sometimes. Certainly got rid of a lot of fear over the years, but AA did that for me, working through the steps of my sponsor. And so what we did was we went through the steps that summer. He would sit with me at his house. He was single at that time, had not remarried yet. And we would read the big book together. And he told me during one of the early book sessions that we would read the AA big book together and we would do the things that they had written in the book. And he told me that some men and women found a way to stay sober in the 30s, and they wrote the book, and they wrote the book to help other people stay sober. And that made sense to me. I said, well, if it worked, in fact, he even said, if it worked for them, it will probably work for us, is what he said. And so again, I was out of good ideas at that point. I didn't have any other ideas, and so we started reading the book together. I went through and worked the first few steps. Went through and did an inventory, started making amends, particularly with my immediate family. I'm very grateful for them. They certainly didn't deserve the way I treated them when I drank, but they're real grateful that I got sober and was able to make amends with them that summer. In fact, before I went back, but I'd only been sober a few months at the time, and if anybody's I always like to share a little bit about my DMX character, because you get up here sometimes and it sounds all great and really, orderly and all that. But I can assure you, as a newcomer, I think it could have gone either way. I think it was God's grace, maybe just hanging on to some action sometimes. But I actually, and I think our defects of character can be deeply rooted sometimes, and dishonesty was for me. I'd gotten to a level of dishonesty about everything. I mean, if you're drinking alcoholically, at some point your drinking is going to be unacceptable to normal people, and you're going to have to lie. You know, I mean, in terms of the quantity you're drinking or how frequently you're drinking. I mean, I was lying about that all the time. And of course, I lied about a lot of other things too. You know, just almost a lifestyle. But it took me a while. I think it's almost like peeling an onion. You know, in terms of looking at our defects of character. But I was telling everybody for a long. Well, I'll tell you how long it was. I was telling the group I was in, the principals group, and the group I joined in Boone and Blowing Rock when I moved there, that I've been sober since December of '96. Well, that wasn't true. I'd actually gotten drunk the night before I met Wallace, which was like late March of '97. So, I mean, there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. But this is how delusional I was, and then maybe somebody can relate to this. I didn't see the discrepancy at the time. And I'm not saying that I was a guy that was intentionally lying about that. I was clearly lying about it, but I can tell you, I didn't realize I was lying about it until I knew. You just don't know till you know. And so at some point I had gone back to college, and it would have been September or even October of '97. It's almost a year later, right? And I'm walking to class one day, and it dawned on me that I had continued to drink after December of '96 up through April 2nd of '96. And I knew it, and at that moment I knew it and knew I had to tell somebody. You know, it wasn't... I can tell you, if you're an alcoholic, you'll understand this kind of bizarre delusion. That's why we share. That's why we like to have closed meetings. I know this is an open meeting, but sometimes you got to get some weirdness out there. But anyway, I didn't know. I mean, I was lying about that. And in part, and again, I'll just share this with you guys. I'd gotten off the drugs in December of '96, but I continued to drink. I think I said that earlier. But anyway, that's how the sobriety date got all twisted up, right? But once it hit me, you know, I knew something was going to have to give. I knew that I was going to have to come clean about that. But I can tell you, until that moment, from December of '96 until sometime in October of '97, I thought it was okay. And I was telling everybody, you know, what my sobriety date was, you know, December 16th of '96. So I spent the next 2 or 3 days trying to figure out in my mind why I didn't need to tell somebody that, right? Like I'm starting to rationalize, well, you don't have to bring it up now. You know, it's a long time ago. Why bother anyone with that information now, you know? But it was really beginning to spin in my head. You know, once I became aware of that, once that honesty started to move in my life, yeah, I think that's how it's been for me with defects of character, particularly self-centeredness, fear, dishonesty. You know, I become aware of those things as I stay sober. Sometimes when I'm working with others or in my family, and you begin to see they need to be corrected. And so that's what happened for me. And so I probably spent 2 or 3 days mulling this over in my head about, oh my God, I can't, you know, this is embarrassing, you know. And to tell my sponsor, so I remember I had been putting it off, and I rushed back into the dorm room, picked up the phone, and called them, and I said, Steve, December's not really my sobriety date. Sometime, all I knew at that point was like sometime late March. I didn't really know when it was because I drank periodically during that time. And you know, he talked me down off the ledge because I was, you know, it was really, it began to get huge in my mind about that. And he said, look, we'll clean that up. You know, you're sober now. We'll mend the fences. And so what he had me do was go, when I came back home for Christmas break, I told the group there that I had mended my sobriety date. But as I look back now, I was only sober really a few months when I went back to college. But I was, one of the things the members told me early on, and I've always tried to stress this with guys I sponsor, was that if you keep your sobriety first, you can do a lot of things that don't look possible. And a lot of things that don't look possible will come true. You know, I've seen it happen over and over again for people. And I really was grateful to be sober. I did not want to drink. That's not why I wanted to go back to college. I was grateful to get a second chance to go. So when they let me back in, again, I searched out groups. You know, you could, Appalachian is in Boone. It's kind of in a valley there. And I could walk to meetings almost every night of the week from where the dorms were because we couldn't have cars. But I ended up joining a group. Mike and I were talking about this earlier. You know, I was attracted to sort of real solution-based groups like this one, you know, that studied the steps, studied the literature, talked about the solution, that kind of thing, and didn't have open discussion meetings. And so Boone had a lot of open discussion meetings. And as I look back now, I'm a guy who was relatively new who got sober in a lot of those meetings. So I'm grateful for what they were. There were good people up there. They're just not the kind of meetings I would choose to go to today. But there was a group in Blowing Rock called the Promises Group that had a 12 and 12 study on Monday nights and a big book study on Wednesday nights. And they met Monday, Wednesday. And that became my home base for the next 4 years. And so I had the idea. In fact, Keith Lewis told me this, that, you know, if you go up there with the idea that you stay sober, you probably have a chance to get an education, you know, was what he told me. don't go up there with the idea that you got to suddenly go up there and hit the books every night and try and get a college degree. And what he told me, and some of the other members of my group, and maybe some of you, in fact, said that if you stay sober, you got a shot. And that made sense to me, because I know for me, when I drink, all bets are off. I mean, I don't have any illusion today that my drinking would be any different. I mean, it's been a long time since I drank, a long time since I wanted to drink, but I have no doubt that if I took a drink, it would be ugly quick. It might not be ugly tonight, but it would be ugly in fairly short order. I mean, I just know how my mind works. I mean, I barely stayed sane trying to stay right in the middle of AA sometimes, much less, getting on the fringe of it or something like that. But anyway, I mean, that was the experience I had. And so I went up there with the idea that I would stay sober. I went to meetings all the time. And I think I had a little bit of a better attitude because I had recognized at that point that I had really thrown away a great opportunity the year before. And to go to college. So anyway, I did. I stayed up there and joined that group and came back. And again, we visited you guys down here a lot when I was home on different vacations and things like that. So it's pretty cool. But a lot of those defects of character began to show themselves. In fact, when I did my first 4-step with Steve, I don't think I told him this at this time, but I believed this. And I tell it now because it's funny, but at the time it was sort of embarrassing. But like I said, I was 19, and when we read about defects of character, I figured, well, here I am. This is my impression of me, right? Just a kid that drank too much. Now, I might be an alcoholic, but I probably didn't have defects of character like a lot of you older guys and women did, I mean, really, I thought, I'm only 19, I don't have any defects of character, right? That's what I thought. And so, I don't think I told my sponsor that, but I begrudgingly went through and went on and did the 4-step and wrote it out and did a 5th step with Steve. And the amazing thing about that, I say that because it just shows you how delusional I was at one time. And you can come back to it. If you stay sober, it'll get better. When I start sponsoring new guys, they get all kinds of weird stuff. I just let's get going in the steps and see what happens. A lot of that weirdness will shake out, or problems will fix themselves, and the ones that don't, will try and address it, But, I was full of defects of character. Didn't even know I had it. I mean, like I said, I was dishonest about everything, including my sobriety date for a long time in AA, without even really knowing it. I was really only honestly dishonest about it for about 2 or 3 days. I mean, in terms of actually being aware of it. But I mean, I was full of fear. That's why I love to drink so much. I was so self-centered. And I've seen different levels of that as I've been sober, but I certainly had the belief, for whatever reason, that that I was different. The rules might be all right for Daniel, but they're not. They don't apply the same way to me. I get a pass, or I get a break, and I just always had that idea. And I don't think anyone ever gave me that idea. I'm just so full of self. That's just the way I see the world. In fact, I was actively stealing from my family and wrecking their vehicles. And if you had asked me, I said, no, I didn't hurt them. They get on my nerves. They bother me. They're not treating me right, is what I would have told you. But I was clearly destroying their property and harming them in all kinds of ways. And my friends, too. Anybody that got around me at the end, it was just like anybody at the end of the drinking, it's ugly. Things are just ugly. But I didn't know it. I was so self-centered, so isolated, so full of self that I didn't think I was hurting anybody but myself. In fact, I remember saying, people just leave me alone, then I'll get myself straightened out. And of course, that wasn't true at all. But again, I'm grateful that I did the 4-step, because if I had not started that journey, and I didn't necessarily become aware of all those things that moment when I did a 5th step, 21 years ago, but it was a start on that process. And I think that we have to change. I was so self-centered, so dishonest, so full of fear, self-centered fear, all that stuff, that there was no way you could live in that. I mean, if you're going to get sober, you're going to have to move past it. I think that's what the steps are designed to do, or to move us past it, whether we want to or not. And again, I wasn't consciously aware of any of this stuff. I just went through an action process with Steve, taking these steps. And this is what happened. It almost happened in spite of me in many ways, So, like I said, when I'm sponsoring new guys, I try and get them right in the book, right in there, and start working steps, and we'll see what kind of shakes out on that. Because I think just doing the steps, just reading with newcomers, is a spiritual process. Taking some of those real basic actions together. So, anyway, I stayed sober up there. Again, I'm a guy who couldn't complete 1 semester of college on my own, and I went to Appalachian and finished 4 years and graduated. And I give credit to God and Alcoholics Anonymous. I say that with a lot of humility. I'll just give you an example of how powerful AA is and sobriety is. You can go from a guy who couldn't finish 1 semester to finishing college. I absolutely credit AA for that. Because again, I took a lot of the stuff I learned in AA about showing up and being on time and being responsible and trying to do what was asked of me. I took that in a lot of my classes, and I did well. I mean, some of the AA principles, like our traditions, translate very well into the real world, the work world, or certainly the academic world. And so I did real well. I showed up when class met. I was there, and I tried to be prepared when I was there. Just like if you're chairing your home group. I know you guys are real organized in this group, have a lot of committees of people that know where to be, when they need to be there. Somebody's here to set up and take care of things. And, if you take some of those same principles into any situation, whether it's work or family or school, you come out really, really good practicing those kind of principles. And so I would do the lessons and be prepared for class, and I did pretty good. A lot of my classmates didn't do those things. And so it turned out well. I met my wife up there, or the woman who would become my wife. I was sober 2 years. We dated while we were up there, and then when we graduated in 2001, she was up there in Appalachian too, and we moved down here. And I got into law school at Campbell, and that's sort of what brought us back down to this part of the state again, or at least part of the way back down the state, over to Buies Creek for that period of time. And so I moved here in 2001, and I've been a little bit closer to you guys since that time. But really grateful for that. I look back, my wife's never seen me drink, and I'm grateful. And again, I give credit to Alcoholics Anonymous for that. We were married for 5 years. We started having kids. We had our first child in 2006. In fact, he just turned 12 on Monday, in fact. So it's kind of awesome. And then we had our second one in 2009. And it's amazing, I think it's some of the gifts of sobriety in the program, that I have a family today that cares about where I am. And, I'm a father to those kids. And again, they've never seen me drink. And I like to at least visit this topic, particularly when I speak, because it's so easy to look around today and think, man, I finally got it all worked out. This is how I deserve all these things in my life today, because of who I am. Get back into that self-centered kind of delusion stuff again. Because I like to visit the topic because if I had it my way, I wouldn't have been sober to begin with. I think if I kept on, I would have ended up dead or locked up. No doubt about that with the way I was drinking. And so the life today I have is a gift from God and Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think it's good to be a little bit humble about that today because I can look around. There's no evidence of the destruction of my alcoholism anymore. I mean, my parents remember. My parents are still alive. They remember it. They lived through it, obviously. My brother's still alive. In fact, my brother's been sober in AA now about a year and a half. He was there and had a front row seat to my drinking when it really took off and when it ended. In fact, his was just really getting started when mine ended. So there are some people that remember it, but the people that are around me now, my law partner, my family, even my doctor, we talk about 12-stepping your physicians. I'm sure you guys have talked about that. That if you know a doctor, tell them you're in AA. I mean, again, this is just my experience. I'm not saying you have to, but some people are weird about that kind of stuff. But I'll tell my physicians I'm in AA because I like them to say, that AA works, right? Here's a guy that's sober and happy and doing the right thing. And so I tell my family doctor this, and I don't think he believes me. I tried to tell him, and at some point I just quit trying to convince him. I mean, somebody says, "Oh, that's great," and I just get out of here. He doesn't care. Again, I think it's my duty just to tell him that I'm sober, and that if he's got somebody that wants to talk to somebody about not drinking, I'm available to him. It's what I try and get him to understand. But I just don't think he believes I'm an alcoholic, and I don't think at any point he's going to believe I'm an alcoholic. And I can assure you that's not because of me, it's because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, if I were still drinking, I can assure you he would believe I was an alcoholic. My liver enzymes, everything would be going haywire. I'd smell like alcohol, showing up in his office, trying to steal his prescription pad or something. He would know I was an alcoholic for sure if I was still drinking. But again, and that's a gift of the program. My family's never seen me drink, and my wife's always been supportive. Only been a few times she gave me a little bit of heat, and I'm not a guy who's had to run around and speak a lot like some of our other members have. But every once in a while I've had some AA commitments for a number of nights in a row, and I don't get a lot of heat about that. I'm really, really grateful for that, for what the family does. We were talking before the meeting about Al-Anon and stuff, and just families of alcoholics. Our families do a lot for us. If Kelly weren't at home with our boys tonight, I'd have to hire a babysitter, or they'd be here, hanging out in the back or something. And they're civilized enough now to do that. I think they can hang around and be okay. But at one time, they were really, young. I mean, it would have been bizarre. I mean, they would have been, making too much noise. But there's a lot of stuff our family does that you don't see sometimes. And I know for me, and I think my wife's always, my wife has known me a long, long time now. We've been married now since 2001, but she knows how bizarre I can be even in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, I've had some self-imposed crisis visit. We've had some outside stuff like Kelly's father. Kelly's was he's only 38 years old now, But her father died the first year we were married. She was only like 21 or 22 years old. Her father died. It was really a sudden, very tragic sort of thing. And that was really hard. I didn't have to know how to deal with that. I was just sort of numb through that process. And I don't think I did. I think I did the best I could in terms of walking with her through that. It just wasn't very good. I think I'd do a lot better today with a lot more spiritual growth through the steps in AA. But anyway, we walked through that, and her mother died of cancer in 2010. So she really had some very bizarre things sometimes that visited us in our marriage. But yeah, those are things that happen to everybody. We're all going to have death in our families. Whether we want to or not, it's just a fact of life. But I've had some bizarre stuff that I created in my mind that gave me a lot of trouble too. I had some physical problems back in 2012, and if you took the physical problem, it was about this big, and if you took the mental problem I brought with it, it was about that big. So you have like this, and then I'm dealing with all this, that I've laid on top of it. And I mean, it was a bizarre period. And I look back now, I'm grateful that I was right in the middle of Alcoholics. I've always gone to my home group. I've always had a sponsor. I think I've called Steve every week for the last 21 years. I've always just tried to hold on to those actions. But had I not, there were times like that. It was the end of 2012, beginning of 2013. I was as crazy as I've ever been. And it's hard to even look back and to remember that it was really this way, but I can assure you it was. I got to the point where I would go to drive to my office, an office I'd been at for over 11 years. No, not quite 11, maybe 9 or 10 years at that time. And I would get in the car and I'd be too scared and I feel like I couldn't breathe and I'd turn around and drive home. And this is the guy, I was sober, at that time, like 13, 14 years. So how do you, what's going on? I thought so if you show up at an ER saying I'm having trouble breathing and my heart's beating real fast, they assume you're having a heart attack, right? Well, I was too, and so until they do a whole bunch of tests, to rule out everything, you don't know what you've got. And so I went through that whole thing, and it turned out my mind was just blowing up a little bit. I did have a little bit of physical stuff. I had to have some surgery at the end of 2012. But I mean, it was a minor fraction of what I had done in terms of what was going on in my mind. And so I'm having all this fear that I don't know is fear. My body's just like vibrating all the time. And again, I credit Alcoholics Anonymous, my sponsor, and being right in the middle of this thing. It wasn't that I ever wanted to drink during that time. But I can tell you, there might have been a time when I would have been okay if I weren't here anymore. I mean, it felt that bad at times. I felt that scared, didn't know what was going on. And again, large part of it was totally self-created. So I think that's why it's important to continue to show up in AA, because life's going to visit. Things are going to happen. My mind's going to create things, even if I don't sometimes. So anyway, it's good to be back. I'm sort of rambling on here, but I love this group. I love being invited back. I appreciate you guys having me here. My sponsor was here earlier in the month. I was joking with him. I said they put me at the very end of the month to clean up anything you have done earlier in the month. I'll be there to clean it up, take care of that. But it's good to be among friends and see you guys. So anyway, thanks.